She walked into the bank to deposit her hard-earned money, but instead of service, she got suspicion. Aaliyah Freeman, a 13-year-old black girl, faced humiliation at Heritage National Bank. But what the employees didn't know, she was the daughter of the bank's chairman. What happens next will shock you. Keep watching as this young girl turns a moment of discrimination into a nationwide reckoning for racial justice in the financial system. The grand entrance of Heritage National Bank shimmered under the afternoon sunlight. The polished marble floors, the tall glass windows reflecting the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. Everything about the place screamed prestige, exclusivity, and power. Inside, business professionals, executives, and high-net-worth individuals moved in and out, carrying briefcases filled with documents, discussing investment portfolios, and shaking hands over lucrative deals. Amidst all of this, a 13-year-old black girl, Aaliyah Thompson, stepped through the revolving door. She wasn't here for a corporate merger, nor was she an investor looking to negotiate interest rates. She was here for something simple: to deposit $5,000 into her savings account. It was money she had earned through a prestigious math scholarship and generous birthday gifts from family. To her, this was a significant milestone, a step toward financial independence, something her father, Samuel Thompson, the CEO of this very bank, had always instilled in her. But as soon as she approached the teller, the atmosphere shifted. The unequal treatment begins. Aaliyah stood patiently in line, clutching her envelope tightly, excitement buzzing through her veins. She had imagined this moment for weeks, walking into the bank, making her first big deposit, and leaving with a receipt that showed the money she had saved and earned. But she quickly noticed something unsettling. A middle-aged white man in an expensive suit walked in. He didn't even have to wait. A teller spotted him and immediately ushered him into a VIP lounge. "Right this way, Mr. Jenkins. We'll take care of everything." A Hispanic man in work clothes stepped up to the counter next. He simply wanted to cash a check. But instead of processing the transaction, the teller bombarded him with questions that no white customer had been asked just moments ago. "Do you have 2 forms of ID? Can you provide proof of employment? Do you have a work permit?" The man hesitated before answering, clearly taken aback by the unnecessary scrutiny. Aaliyah's stomach tightened. She recognized what was happening, but she tried to shake the feeling. Surely when it was her turn, things would go smoothly. But she was wrong. Aaliyah's turn. The suspicion intensifies. When Aaliyah finally reached the counter, she smiled and slid the envelope across to Rachel, the young teller. "Hi, I'd like to deposit this into my savings account." Rachel barely glanced at her before her expression hardened. Her eyes darted to the envelope, then back to Aaliyah. Instead of processing the transaction, she crossed her arms and asked in a flat tone, "Where did this money come from?" The question caught Aaliyah off guard. She blinked. She had watched multiple white customers deposit money without being questioned. She had seen them greeted with smiles and professionalism. So why was she being interrogated? She straightened her shoulders and responded confidently, "It's from a math scholarship and birthday gifts." Rachel's face didn't change. In fact, her frown deepened. She reached for the envelope, hesitated, then turned to her colleague, Mark, a senior teller sitting nearby. "Mark, take a look at this." Mark, a white man in his 30s, stood up and approached. His piercing blue eyes scanned Aaliyah's face, then her clothes, then the money. His mouth curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like a smirk filled with doubt. "This is a lot of money for someone like you," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Are you sure it's really yours?" Aaliyah felt her fingers tighten into fists. Her heart pounded, but she refused to let them see her frustration. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "It's mine, and I have an account here." Mark and Rachel exchanged a glance. Then Mark leaned in, lowered his voice, but made sure Aaliyah could still hear him. Maybe someone gave it to her to deposit for them. The accusation hit her like a slap to the face. They didn't believe her. They didn't believe that a 13-year-old black girl could legally own $5,000. A public humiliation. The murmurs around her grew louder. Other customers started to turn and look, their eyes filled with curiosity, some with judgment. Mark turned back to Rachel and muttered something even more shocking. "It could be dirty money." Rachel nodded in agreement, then turned back to Aaliyah, her voice cold and detached. "We need to verify this with management." With that, she walked away, leaving Aaliyah standing there alone, humiliated and furious. She had never felt this way before. Not in school, not at home. She was a straight A student, a math prodigy, the daughter of a powerful businessman. But none of that mattered here. All that mattered was that she was black and holding more money than they thought she deserved. Aaliyah takes action. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. She wouldn't let them break her. Instead of arguing, she reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts, found the one number that would end this nonsense in an instant, and hit dial. The phone rang once, then twice, and then the deep, authoritative voice of her father, Samuel Thompson, CEO of Heritage National Bank, came through the line. "Aaliyah, what's wrong?" The entire bank went silent as Aaliyah lifted her chin and calmly said, "Dad, I'm at your bank, and they won't let me deposit my money." In that moment, the entire atmosphere of the bank changed, because in just a few minutes, the people who had doubted her, humiliated her, and treated her like a criminal would soon realize the biggest mistake of their careers, and they would pay the price for their racism. What happens next will shock you. Stay tuned as this story unfolds. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to see how Aaliyah turns this injustice into a fight for real change. The inside of Heritage National Bank was pristine. Marble floors gleamed under the bright lights, chandeliers hung above polished wood counters, and employees moved swiftly, attending to their clients. It was a place where wealth was not just measured but displayed, where suits, designer handbags, and gold watches were signals of importance. But today, 13-year-old Aaliyah Thompson was about to learn something disturbing. Not all customers were treated equally. She had waited patiently in line for nearly 40 minutes, holding an envelope containing $5,000, money she had earned through a prestigious math scholarship and birthday gifts from family. This was a moment of pride for her first real step toward financial independence. Yet as she stood at the counter, watching how other customers were being served, she quickly realized something was very wrong. Preferential treatment for the privileged. Just ahead of her, a white man in an expensive navy blue suit stepped inside. He didn't wait in line. Before he even spoke, a teller rushed to him with a smile, gesturing toward the private VIP lounge. "Good afternoon, Mr. Henderson. Please come right this way. We'll take care of everything." Aaliyah watched as the man was led past the long line of waiting customers and into a room with plush leather chairs, where coffee and refreshments were being served. Not a single word was spoken in protest. No one seemed surprised. It was as if this level of treatment was expected, if you looked the part. Moments later, an elderly Asian couple approached the counter. They were well-dressed but humble, holding hands as they patiently waited for their turn. When they reached the teller, there were no warm greetings, no friendly smiles. Instead, the teller simply pointed toward the waiting area and said flatly, "Take a seat. Someone will call you when we're ready." No explanation, no effort to make them feel valued. The couple exchanged a brief glance, clearly puzzled by the contrast in treatment, but they said nothing and quietly walked to the seating area. A Hispanic man in work clothes was next. He approached the counter, holding a small $800 check. It was a simple request. He just wanted to cash it. But the teller's demeanor immediately changed. Her tone became sharp and demanding. Do you have two forms of ID? Where's your social security card? Can you provide proof of employment? The man hesitated. He had been banking here for years, yet he had never been questioned like this before. Aaliyah felt the discomfort build in her chest. She had attended financial literacy seminars with her father, where executives talked about fair service, customer-first policies, and transparency. But what she was witnessing now was nothing like the polished ideals spoken about in corporate meetings. This wasn't just about service. This was a double standard, one based entirely on appearance. Aaliyah steps up and faces the same bias. When it was finally Aaliyah's turn, she approached the counter with her heart still full of excitement, determined not to let what she had seen shake her confidence. She placed her $5,000 in cash on the counter and smiled. I'd like to deposit this into my savings account. But instead of the warm service given to Mr. Henderson, the teller, Rachel, stared at the money, her expression instantly hardening. Her eyes darted from the envelope of cash to Aaliyah's simple hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. And then the questions began. Where did this money come from? The tone was not one of professional curiosity. It was suspicious, accusatory. Aaliyah's smile faded slightly. Why was she being questioned? She had just watched several white customers deposit and withdraw money without anyone interrogating them. She cleared her throat and responded, It's from a math scholarship and birthday gifts. Rachel's eyes narrowed. She glanced over her shoulder at her colleague, Mark, a senior teller. Mark, take a look at this. Mark, a tall white man in his early 30s, walked over, took one glance at the cash, then looked Aaliyah up and down, his expression unreadable, but full of silent judgment. Then he smirked. That's a lot of money, Memory, for someone like you. The words hit Aaliyah like a slap across the face. Her fingers clenched into fists, but she forced herself to remain composed. It's mine, she said firmly. I have an account here. Mark exchanged a glance with Rachel, as if they had already decided she was lying. Then, in a barely whispered voice, Mark said, Maybe someone gave it to her to deposit for them. Aaliyah's blood ran cold. They didn't believe her. They thought that because she was black, young, and dressed modestly, she couldn't possibly own that money. It could be dirty money, Mark added, just loud enough for other customers to hear. Whispers spread through the lobby. Some people turned to stare. Others pretended not to notice, but Aaliyah saw their nervous glances. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with pure frustration. She had done everything right. She had worked hard, won scholarships, saved money, just like her father had taught her. Yet instead of being treated with respect, she was being humiliated in front of an entire bank full of people. Enough was enough. Taking a deep breath, Aaliyah didn't argue. She didn't beg. Instead, she pulled her phone out of her hoodie pocket and scrolled through her contacts. She found the one number that would end this in seconds, her father. The phone rang once, then twice, and then the deep, commanding voice of Samuel Thompson, CEO of Heritage National Bank, came through the line. Aaliyah, what's wrong? The entire bank went silent. Every single teller, customer, and bank employee suddenly froze in place, realizing that something big was about to happen. Lifting her chin, Aaliyah locked eyes with Mark and Rachel and calmly said, Dad, I'm at your bank, and they won't let me deposit my money. A chill ran through the air, because in just a few minutes, the same people who had judged her, doubted her, and humiliated her were about to realize the biggest mistake of their careers, and they would pay the price for their discrimination. This is just the beginning. Stay tuned to see what happens next, because justice is coming. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to follow Aaliyah's fight against systemic racism in the banking industry. The entire bank fell into a suffocating silence. Rachel, the teller who had questioned Aaliyah Thompson's legitimacy, swallowed hard, exchanging a nervous glance with Mark. The smugness that had been so apparent on their faces just moments ago was now completely gone. Everyone had heard her words. "Dad, I'm at your bank, and they won't let me deposit my money." And now a deep, powerful voice echoed from the phone speaker. "Give the phone to whoever's in charge, now." Mark's face went pale. Rachel's hands trembled as she instinctively took a step back from the counter. Every employee and customer within earshot felt a sudden shift in power. A moment ago, Aaliyah was just another young black girl being judged and humiliated. But now, she was the daughter of Samuel Thompson, the CEO of Heritage National Bank. And in seconds, the very people who had belittled and disrespected her were about to pay the price for their actions. The moment of realization. Rachel turned to Mark in pure panic. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mark, who had previously oozed arrogance, suddenly looked like he had seen a ghost. His mind raced for an escape, some way to salvage this before it spiraled out of control. But there was none. The bank's branch manager, Victoria Haynes, had been watching from her glass office just moments before, entertained by the scene unfolding at the counter. Now she shot up from her chair and stormed toward the front. Victoria was a seasoned professional, a woman who had climbed the corporate ladder over 2 decades. She had always believed in maintaining appearances, and right now those appearances were crumbling. The moment she reached the counter, she snatched the phone from Aaliyah's hand and forced on a strained smile. "Mr. Thompson, what a surprise!" Victoria's voice was suddenly sickly sweet, drenched in artificial warmth. But the voice on the other end was ice cold. "Cut the nonsense! What's going on here?" Victoria stiffened. She looked down at Aaliyah, and for the first time, saw her not as an inconvenience, but as the single biggest mistake she had ever made. The weight of a single name Aaliyah stood tall, watching the panic spread like wildfire. The same tellers who had mocked her just minutes ago were now fumbling over themselves, trying to find a way to undo their damage. The same bank employees who had smirked in quiet agreement when Mark suggested the money was dirty were now pretending they had nothing to do with it. But it was too late. Samuel Thompson's voice was slow, controlled, and deadly serious. "I'm 5 minutes away." Rachel let out an audible gasp. Mark took a step back, gripping the edge of the counter as if trying to ground himself. Victoria's breathing grew shallow. They had judged Aaliyah on her appearance, her age, and the color of her skin. And now they were about to find out exactly how wrong they were. 5 minutes. That's all they had left before their world came crashing down. The doors of Heritage National Bank swung open with force. Samuel Thompson, the CEO, stepped inside, his polished shoes striking the marble floor with an authority that sent chills through the room. Behind him, 2 senior executives and the bank's chief compliance officer followed, their expressions as cold as steel. The entire branch seemed to shrink under the weight of their presence. Mark, Rachel, and branch manager Victoria Haynes all stood frozen at the counter. The once smug expressions had vanished, replaced by something close to sheer terror. Everyone in the bank knew exactly what was about to happen. The CEO, Samuel Thompson, didn't waste a second. His sharp, calculating gaze landed on Victoria first. "Tell me exactly what happened here." His voice wasn't raised, but it carried enough power to silence the entire room. Victoria swallowed hard, struggling to find words. "Mr. Thompson, there seems to have been a slight misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" His voice cut through the air like a blade. He turned toward the employees at the counter. "You refused service to my daughter. You questioned her money. You humiliated her in front of an entire room of customers." Rachel's breathing became shallow. Mark's face turned ghostly pale. Even the security guard who had been standing near the entrance took a quiet step away, not wanting to get caught in the blast zone. I watched the security footage on my way here. Samuel's eyes darkened. You didn't hesitate when a white businessman walked in. You greeted him with smiles and immediate service. But when a young black girl, approached the counter, you all decided she wasn't worthy of her own money. His fury was controlled, but everyone could feel the storm brewing beneath the surface. The firings begin. Samuel turned toward Rachel first. You were the one who first questioned her, correct? Rachel could barely speak, her lips trembling. I was just following security protocols, sir. Samuel tilted his head slightly, as if studying a liar trying to weasel out of the inevitable. Then why didn't you follow the same protocol for every other customer? Rachel's eyes darted around, looking for support, but none came. You're fired. The words struck like thunder. Rachel let out a small gasp, as if she had been physically hit. She looked at Victoria, but the manager was too consumed with her own fear to offer any help. Samuel didn't even spare her another glance before turning to Mark. And you? Mark felt his knees weaken. Mr. Thompson, please. I didn't mean... You accused my daughter of money laundering, Samuel interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut through steel. Mark's throat tightened. Sir, I was just... You're fired. Mark's shoulders sagged. He knew there was no way out. The final blow. Finally, Samuel turned to Victoria Haynes, the branch manager. She stood stiff, forcing on a smile as if trying to salvage any last bit of control. Mr. Thompson, I can assure you, I had no idea this was happening. I would never allow... Samuel held up a hand. Stop! Victoria's mouth snapped shut. You let this happen under your leadership. You encouraged it. And now, your career ends today. You're fired. Victoria stumbled back slightly, her world shattering in an instant. Samuel took a deep breath, his rage finally settling. Security, escort them out. They are no longer employees of Heritage National Bank. The entire bank watched as Rachel, Mark, and Victoria gathered their things in silence, their faces pale, their arrogance gone. As they walked toward the door, Aaliyah stood tall, watching justice be served. And in that moment, the entire bank knew that things would never be the same again. The moment Aaliyah Freeman walked out of Heritage National Bank, she thought the nightmare was over. She was wrong, because the real storm was just beginning. The video goes viral. One of the customers present during the incident, a young man named Derek Carter, had secretly recorded the entire exchange. He uploaded the video to social media with the caption, "A 13-year-old black girl tries to deposit her own money. The bank treats her like a criminal. Why? Because she's black." Within minutes, the video exploded. Thousands of people shared it. Within an hour, it had millions of views. By the end of the day, it was the #1 trending topic in the country. The public's reaction. The response was immediate and furious. Outrage swept across social media. People flooded Heritage National Bank's official pages, leaving angry comments, bad reviews, and demands for justice. Celebrities, activists, and even politicians weighed in. This is why Black Americans still don't trust the financial system. A well-known activist tweeted, "If this happened to the CEO's daughter, imagine what happens to regular customers every day." A viral post read, "Heritage National needs to be held accountable," a U.S. senator demanded. And then came the hashtags, "Me or banking while black, near fire, them all, Bear justice for Aaliyah, Heritage National in crisis." By the next morning, Heritage National Bank was in full-blown crisis mode. Stock prices plummeted. Investors panicked. Major clients threatened to pull their money. Protesters gathered outside the bank's headquarters, holding signs that read, "Black money matters" and "End racist banking." The bank's executive board scrambled to contain the damage. The CEO's response, Samuel Thompson, still furious over what had happened to his daughter, refused to play the PR game. Instead of releasing a carefully worded corporate apology, he held a press conference. Standing before a sea of cameras, he spoke clearly and firmly. My daughter was judged and humiliated, not because of her actions, but because of her skin color. This is unacceptable, and I take full responsibility. Gasps echoed through the room. This wasn't just another corporate excuse. This was a CEO admitting the truth and demanding change. He announced sweeping reforms, mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, a new independent oversight committee to monitor fairness in banking, a hotline for customers to report discrimination directly to senior executives. But was it enough? The public wasn't sure. The damage had already been done, and Heritage National's name was now synonymous with racial discrimination. One thing was clear. This scandal wasn't going away anytime soon. At first, Aaliyah Freeman had no idea how much her story would matter. She thought the nightmare was over the moment her father, Samuel Thompson, fired the discriminatory employees. She was wrong. Her story wasn't just a personal victory, it was a national movement. A spark that ignited a fire. The video of Aaliyah's humiliation inside Heritage National Bank didn't just expose racism in one branch. It exposed a broken system, one that had been silently discriminating against Black and minority customers for decades. Activists, journalists, and financial experts dug deeper, uncovering alarming statistics. Black customers were twice as likely to be denied basic banking services. Banks disproportionately flagged transactions from minority customers as suspicious. Loan approvals for Black entrepreneurs were consistently lower than for their white counterparts, even with the same credit scores. Aaliyah had become the face of something bigger. She was no longer just a 13-year-old girl trying to deposit her savings. She was a symbol of financial reform. The nationwide call for change protests erupted outside banks across the country. Customers shared their own stories of financial discrimination. A Black doctor recounted how he was denied a loan despite a perfect credit score. A Latina business owner explained how her transactions were flagged suspiciously, while her white competitors never faced the same scrutiny. A Muslim couple described being interrogated every time they withdrew large sums of money. The message was clear. The system was rigged, and it was time for a change. Aaliyah speaks out. The media wanted to hear from Aaliyah herself. At first, she wasn't sure what to say. She was just a kid. But then she remembered how she felt standing at that counter, humiliated, judged, and powerless. And she knew she had to speak. At a press conference alongside her father, she stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was calm but powerful. I was told I didn't belong, that my money wasn't mine, that I couldn't be trusted, all because of the color of my skin. She took a deep breath and looked straight into the cameras. No one should feel that way, ever again. The crowd erupted in applause. In that moment, Aaliyah wasn't just a victim of discrimination. She was a leader of change. The fight for financial equality begins. Because of Aaliyah's bravery, real reforms began to take shape. Congress introduced a new bill, the Fair Banking Act, to fight racial discrimination in financial institutions. Banks across the country announced mandatory anti-bias training for employees. A hotline was created to allow customers to report discrimination directly to regulators. One girl, one moment of injustice. And now the entire banking system was being forced to change. Aaliyah Freeman had become more than a name. She had become a movement. The policies were announced. The executives made promises. The media celebrated the reforms. But Aaliyah Freeman knew one thing. Words mean nothing without action. She had seen how quickly corporations cover their tracks when scandals break. She had heard stories of banks making pledges, only to return to the same discriminatory practices once public outrage faded. So, she decided to do something bold. She was going to put the system to the test. A secret visit to Heritage National. A month after the scandal, Aaliyah returned to Heritage National Bank. This time, she didn't walk in as the chairman's daughter. She didn't have cameras following her, and there was no VIP treatment waiting for her. She dressed in a simple hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, just like before. No designer labels. No obvious signs of wealth. To everyone else, she was just a regular black teenager, exactly how she had been treated that day. Would things be different this time? Or would the bank prove that nothing had changed at all? The moment of truth. Aaliyah walked up to the counter, her heart pounding. She placed a check for $10,000 on the desk, a deliberate test to see if the tellers had truly changed the way they treated black customers. The employee, a new face, smiled at her. "Good afternoon. How can I assist you today?" No sneers, no suspicious looks, no unnecessary questions. Aaliyah kept her voice steady. "I'd like to deposit this into my savings account." The teller nodded, typing quickly. "Of course. Let me just verify your account. Do you need a receipt today?" That was it. No interrogation about where the money came from. No whispers to a supervisor. No humiliating stares from employees. Just a normal banking experience. Real change or just for show? As Aaliyah stepped away, she took a slow look around the bank. A Latino construction worker was cashing a check. No extra questions. A black woman in business attire was opening an account. No delays. An elderly Asian couple was being assisted with smiles and patience. This time, everyone was receiving equal service. It wasn't just for Aaliyah. The bank had truly changed. A small smile crept onto her face. For the first time, she truly believed it. She had made a difference. Aaliyah Freeman's story wasn't just about one girl in one bank. What started as a moment of humiliation inside Heritage National Bank had now transformed into a national conversation about financial discrimination. People across the country, Black, Latino, Asian, working-class Americans, began to speak out. They weren't just supporting Aaliyah's fight, they were sharing their own stories. This wasn't just one girl's battle anymore. It was the beginning of a movement. Banks under pressure. After the scandal, other financial institutions started facing intense scrutiny. Customers started recording their banking experiences. Videos of unfair treatment began circulating on social media. Lawsuits against banks for racial discrimination skyrocketed, with civil rights groups demanding action. Politicians called for investigations, pressing banks to prove they weren't engaging in discriminatory practices. Heritage National Bank had been the first to fall, but now other major banks were being exposed too. For too long, the banking system had favored the wealthy and the privileged, while treating minorities and working-class individuals like second-class customers. But now, people weren't staying silent anymore. Aaliyah's role in the movement. Despite the media frenzy, Aaliyah wasn't interested in being a celebrity. She didn't care about interviews or magazine covers. What she did care about was real change. When civil rights organizations reached out to her, she didn't hesitate. She helped launch a financial fairness initiative, pushing for policies that held banks accountable. She worked with lawmakers to introduce new banking regulations that required transparency in loan approvals and account denials. She partnered with activists to create a nationwide database where people could report discriminatory banking experiences. Aaliyah wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever walked into a bank and been treated like they didn't belong. The future of financial justice. The movement sparked by Aaliyah Freeman was only growing. Protests were held outside major banks. Customers began moving their money to minority-owned banks that prioritize fairness. And one thing became clear. This wasn't just about one girl. one bank, or one moment. This was about a broken system that needed to change, and Aaliyah Freeman had just lit the match. Aaliyah Freeman had won a battle, but the war for justice was far from over. Her case had shaken the financial industry, forcing banks to reevaluate their policies. But deep down, Aaliyah knew the problem wasn't just about one bank or one policy. It was about an entire system built on inequality. A system still in need of change. Even after Heritage National Bank faced public backlash, reports continued surfacing from other banks. Black and Latino customers still face longer wait times. Loan applications from minority communities were still being rejected at higher rates. Discrimination wasn't disappearing, it was just being exposed. Aaliyah realized something. One viral story wasn't enough. If real change was going to happen, the fight had to continue. Taking the fight further, determined to keep the pressure on, Aaliyah began working with activists and lawmakers. She pushed for federal investigations into banking discrimination and helped draft proposals that would require banks to publicly disclose their lending and service data to expose bias. She spoke at financial conferences, challenging corporate leaders to take responsibility and commit to fair banking practices. Aaliyah wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for millions. And as long as discrimination existed in the financial system, she wasn't going to stop. Aaliyah Freeman's story is more than just an isolated incident. It is a wake-up call for the financial industry and society as a whole. It highlights the deep-rooted racial discrimination that continues to exist in spaces where fairness should be non-negotiable. The lesson here is clear. Bias is not always loud. Sometimes it's hidden in the way services are denied, in the way people are judged before they even speak. Aaliyah's experience exposes the double standards in customer service, showing that Black and minority customers are too often treated with suspicion instead of respect. But her story also teaches another lesson: the power of standing up against injustice. She refused to accept mistreatment, and in doing so, she forced a broken system to change. True justice doesn't happen overnight. It requires speaking up, holding institutions accountable, and demanding transparency. If one person can spark a movement, imagine what we can do together. Discrimination in any form must be challenged. The fight for racial equality is not over, and it is up to all of us to continue pushing for real, lasting change.